And so when we think about a deep joy, what in essence are we thinking about? We're thinking about that God wants to use you in His kingdom at this very moment and forevermore. That's the essence of this deep joy. If that's what we want to find in our lives, if that's what we want joy to be, then it needs to be rooted in that and nothing else. The joy that we find, the joy that we think is going to change us and transform us into people that are going to be joy-filled people, needs to be rooted in understanding that Christ has brought us salvation. And that our deep joy is in that. I mean, do we get excited about that? Do we get pumped up about that? That's what I think what we're trying to get out here this morning. Is do we have joy in the fact? I mean, this is our joy. Do we get as excited as we get about when Peyton throws that touchdown pass to Reggie Wayne in the back of the end zone to win the Super Bowl? Are we just as excited when we talk about God allowing us to have a deep relationship in Him so that we are part of God's kingdom right now? I mean, think about that. Think about that. You are part of God's kingdom right now. And in that essence, you have a deep joy. You have a deep joy. And so how do we get there? How do we live this out? How do we do this? I mean, joy is one of those fruits of the Spirit. I mean, we've been talking about the fruits of the Spirit, and I almost think that this Fruits of the Spirit series is also talking about this is how you need to live. This is how you need to live out your life. As we talked about, as Pastor Brian talked last week, he talked about how you can't just pick and choose a few fruits, and that's okay. You can't just pick the bananas and then the apples and the grapes or the blueberries. Oh, the blueberries are good. But anyway, you have to take it all in. You have to take all the fruits in, and you have to live them out. This is important to understand. As we go through this series, this is how we are called to live as followers of Jesus Christ. We are called to love. We're called to reach out and love. We're called to be love to others because Christ loved us. And we're called to be joyful. We're called to be joyful people. We're called to be joy-filled people. We're called to have a deep joy that will reflect to other individuals. And so we need to understand what this means. We need to understand how we can live this out. We need to understand if we always have to have a smile on our face or be that super annoying person that's always happy. Do we have to be that? I don't know. But I think something that I found interesting, and the first thing in talking about how do we understand living out this joy is that joy is not the same as being happy. Understand that. Joy is not the same as being happy. Okay? Some of you are like, oh, thank goodness. Oh, God. But joy is not the same as being happy. And I think what, in essence, that's really getting at is that that's going to help us understand that joy and sorrow can be occurring at the same time. Because a lot of us can go through some hurt. A lot of us can go through pain. A lot of us have had things that have just happened, and all of a sudden we have bad relationships. We have broken relationships. We have loss of loved ones. And we're just in moments of grieving and sorrow. We just have that. I mean, in the song that we sang today, trading my sorrows. I'm trading my sorrows for your joy. It's not saying getting rid of my sorrows. It's just being, you have sorrow, and it goes with joy. It goes with joy. And so I think that's something that we can, as we begin to figure out how to live this out, we don't have to recognize in being these shiny, happy people all the time. But we have to recognize that we are, even in the midst of our sorrow, we can't dwell in sorrow. We can't dwell in just being, woe is me. But we have to turn that sorrow into joy. And so I think that helps us out in understanding that joy and happiness are not the same. But even in the midst of difficult times, even in the midst of troubled times, we can still be a joyful people. And so that's important to see. I also think in understanding, I also believe in understanding this idea of joy and how we're called to live this joy out in our lives, is that there's a line that it has to be, we have a good conscience. And I think that good conscience actually equals into striving to be holy as God is holy. Doing things in your life that will make you closer to God opposed to stepping back away from God. It's actually Thomas à Kempis, who is this great church father. He wrote a book called The Imitation of Christ. And the key chapter is a chapter, in the whole book is a chapter dealing with joy. and this chapter dealing with joy is dealing with a good conscience. Is that, are you living in a way that is going to be pleasing to God? And when you're doing that, you won't have those the baggage. You won't have the cobwebs that will be stuck in the closet in your life. But rather, you will be going after and having joy in your life because you're actually doing God's will in your life. And that's something that, thanks be to God's grace, thanks be to God's mercy, that those baggage, that can disappear really quick. That's only by the glory of God. But to stay away from that, we continue to strive to be holy people, followers of Christ, people who are trying to live in a way that will reflect just a beauty of God. And so I think we need to understand that. In living this out, even though we are inclined to think that when we are sad, we cannot be glad, but in the life of a God-centered person, sorrow and joy can exist together. And so that's something that we need to remember as we live this life. Mother Teresa had a quote here that says this. It says, I skipped something. Go back. You're right. Go back. This is an awesome quote, and it ties it up. It says, joy is essential. This is a Henry Nouwen quote. Joy is essential to the spiritual life. Joy is essential to the spiritual life. Whatever we may think or say about God, when we are not joyful, our thoughts and words cannot bear fruit. That's important. That's important because it's all about bearing fruit. It's all about going and making other disciples for Jesus Christ to transform this world. Okay? And so our thoughts and words cannot bear fruit. Jesus reveals to us God's love so that His joy may become ours and that our joy may become complete. Joy is the experience of knowing that you are unconditionally loved and that nothing, sickness, failure, emotional distress, oppression, war, or even death can take that love away. Let's look at that one more time. I know I like doing this. Joy is essential to the spiritual life. Absolutely. Absolutely. If you want to be a strong follower of Jesus Christ, if you want to be someone who is known for being a faithful follower of Christ, joy is an essential part of that. Whatever we may think or say about God when we are not joyful, our thoughts and words cannot bear fruit. How we do life, how we experience life, how we express life, if it is not joyful or doesn't have the intent of being joy-filled, then the fruit will be hard to find.